My name is Eleanor Rose Bennett, and I am 82 years old. I've weathered storms that would have broken younger souls, the depression's tail end, my husband's sudden death, the slow erosion of my body through arthritis and age. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for the night I stood in my own doorway and heard my son and his wife plotting my murder. They say betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from those you love most. They're right. But what they don't tell you is how it feels when that betrayal isn't a sudden knife to the back, it's a slow poison, administered daily with a smile, until you're so weak you can barely remember who you used to be. 7 weeks earlier, they had sent me away in an ambulance, my lungs drowning in fluid, my heart struggling to pump oxygen through my failing body. Pneumonia, the doctors said. At my age, it was often a death sentence dressed up in medical terminology. I remember the moment they loaded me into that ambulance like it was yesterday, the cold metal of the gurney beneath me, the oxygen mask fogging with each labored breath, and Marcus, my only son, my baby boy, standing in the driveway with tears streaming down his face. He squeezed my hand so tight it hurt, and his voice cracked when he whispered, "Mom, please don't leave me. I love you so much." I believed him. God help me, I believed every word. As the ambulance doors closed, I caught one last glimpse of him. His shoulders were shaking, and Victoria, his wife, had her arm around him, comforting him. The image seared itself into my memory, my grieving son and his devoted wife, facing the loss of their beloved mother. It was a beautiful lie, and I swallowed it whole. At the hospital, death circled me like a patient vulture. Fever ravaged my body, climbing to 104 degrees. My lungs filled with fluid faster than the doctors could drain it. There were moments, whole hours, really, where I drifted in and out of consciousness, seeing Richard waiting for me in the shadows, his hand outstretched, ready to lead me home. I made my peace. Wrote my final prayers. Forgave my enemies. Prepared to meet my Maker. But then something shifted. Maybe it was pure Bennett stubbornness. My mother always said we were too ornery to die on anyone else's schedule. Maybe it was divine intervention. Or maybe, just maybe, my soul knew something my conscious mind didn't, that I wasn't finished yet, that there was still one final battle to fight. The antibiotics finally took hold. My fever broke. My lungs began to clear. And slowly, painfully, I clawed my way back from the edge of death. The doctors were amazed. "Mrs. Bennett," the young resident said, shaking his head in wonder, "you're a miracle. Patients your age with your condition, well, let's just say we're all very happy to be wrong." They transferred me to a rehabilitation center in the countryside, a peaceful place with wide windows overlooking rolling hills and gardens that reminded me of the ones Richard and I used to tend together. The staff was kind, treating me not like a dying old woman but like a fighter who'd won a hard battle. For 6 weeks, I worked to rebuild my strength. Physical therapy every morning, breathing exercises every afternoon, slow walks through the garden where I'd stop to smell the roses and remember what it felt like to be alive. And the whole time, I waited for Marcus to visit. Surely he'd come see his mother, the woman who'd nearly died. Surely he'd want to celebrate this miracle with me. He never came. Not once. Not even a phone call. "Maybe he's just busy, dear," one of the nurses said, patting my hand with a sympathy that made my chest ache. You know how young people are these days. But I knew my son. Or at least, I thought I did. The boy I raised would have moved heaven and earth to be by my bedside. The man he'd become was apparently content to let me recover alone. Then came the letter that changed everything. It arrived by mistake, really, addressed to Marcus Bennett at the rehabilitation center instead of our home address. The nurse who brought it to me didn't think anything of it, just assumed someone had gotten confused about where I was staying. "Must be from a friend who didn't know you'd been transferred," she said cheerfully. I opened it with shaking hands, expecting maybe a get well card or a bill that had been forwarded. Instead, I found an invoice from Blackwell and Associates law firm. Estate settlement for Eleanor Rose Bennett, deceased. Update on beneficiary transfer request, approved pending official death certificate. Retainer fee, $5,000, paid. Processing fee, $2,500, paid. Expected settlement distribution, 45 to 60 days post-certification. The paper slipped from my fingers and floated to the floor like a dead leaf. Deceased. They'd already declared me deceased. While I was fighting for every breath in a hospital bed, while I was relearning how to walk without assistance, while I was waiting by the phone for my son to call, he was already dividing up my estate. The nurse found me an hour later, still sitting in the same chair, the letter clutched in my trembling hands, tears dried on my cheeks. "Mrs. Bennett? Are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I have," I whispered. "My own." That night, I made a decision. I would return home early, unannounced. No phone call, no warning. I needed to see what was really happening in the house I'd built with Richard, the house I'd signed over to Marcus in a moment of trust that now felt like the worst mistake of my life. I paid for a taxi with money from a small account Marcus didn't know about, one Richard had set up decades ago, for emergencies, he'd said. This certainly qualified. The driver was a kind man in his 60s who reminded me of Richard, same gentle eyes, same careful way of speaking. "Big house," he commented as we pulled up to the gated driveway. "You live here all alone?" "Not alone," I said quietly. But perhaps more alone than I realized. It was past 10 p.m. when we arrived. The gate was locked, odd, since we'd never locked it in all my years there. I had to walk the long gravel drive, my cane tapping out a rhythm that sounded like a funeral march in the quiet night. Every step was an effort, my body still weak from weeks of illness, but determination pushed me forward. The house blazed with light. Every window glowed warm and golden, and I could see movement inside, shadows passing back and forth across the curtains. My heart lifted for just a moment. They were home. They'd be so surprised, so happy to see me. Maybe Marcus had been planning to visit tomorrow. Maybe I'd misjudged everything. I reached for the doorbell, then stopped. Something told me, some instinct I didn't even know I possessed, not to announce myself. Not yet. Instead, I pulled out the spare key I'd kept hidden under the decorative stone frog by the azalea bush since Marcus was in high school. The key he didn't know I still had. My hands shook as I slid it into the lock, turning it slowly, carefully, trying not to make a sound. The door opened silently. I'd always kept those hinges well oiled, a habit from Richard's days, and I stepped into the small mudroom just off the kitchen. That's when I heard them. Not laughter. Not the television. Not the comfortable sounds of a family evening. Whispers. Low, urgent, careful whispers. Every instinct screamed at me to walk in, to call out, "I'm home," and collapse into my son's arms. But another instinct, deeper, older, the kind that kept our ancestors alive on the prehistoric plains, made me freeze. Made me stand absolutely still, barely breathing, and listen. Victoria's voice came first, crisp and businesslike. "So the death certificate will say she passed peacefully in her sleep at the rehabilitation center. Natural causes, organ failure following severe pneumonia. No one questions that at her age." My heart stopped. "But we need to be absolutely careful with the dosage," she continued, and I could hear papers rustling, like she was reading from notes. "One drop too much and there could be traces in the autopsy. Not that there will be one, but we can't be too careful. She's 82 years old and just recovered from pneumonia, Victoria." That was Marcus. My son. My baby. But his voice was flat, emotionless, like he was discussing a business transaction. "Her system is already weak. It won't take much at all. The sedatives are already mixed into the chamomile tea blend, the one she likes so much. Victoria again, and I could hear the smile in her voice. The satisfaction. We'll start tonight when she gets back from the center next week. Just 1 cup every evening with dinner. Within 3 days, maybe 4, her heart will just stop. And we'll be the grieving family, calling 911 in tears, completely devastated. 2 hours after she drinks the final dose, I'll make the call, Marcus said. I'll tell them I found her collapsed in her room. That she'd been feeling tired, but we thought it was just the recovery. They'll comfort us, tell us we did everything we could, that at her age these things happen. And then the inheritance is ours, Victoria finished. The house, the life insurance, the investments she doesn't think we know about. All of it. We'll wait the appropriate mourning period, 6 months maybe, then sell this place and start fresh. Maybe California. Or maybe that villa in Mexico we looked at. The one with the private beach, Marcus murmured, and for the first time I heard emotion in his voice. Excitement. Anticipation. They were planning my murder like it was a vacation. I don't remember backing out of the house. Don't remember the walk to the garden shed, or finding the spare key under the stone, or letting myself into that dusty space where Richard's old tools still hung on the walls. I don't remember sitting down on the overturned crate or pulling the moth-eaten quilt around my shoulders. What I remember is the sound that came out of me, not a scream, not a sob, but something between the two. A sound of utter desolation, of a heart breaking so completely that you can actually feel the pieces falling inside your chest. My son was going to kill me. The boy I'd carried for 9 months. The baby I'd nursed through colic and fevers. The child I'd rocked to sleep every night, singing lullabies until my voice went hoarse. The teenager I'd defended against teachers and bullies. The young man I'd sent to college with every penny Richard and I had saved. That boy was going to poison me for money. I sat in that shed until dawn, and when the first light crept through the dusty windows, I was no longer the sweet, forgiving Eleanor Bennett who'd raised a family and tended a garden and baked cookies for church bake sales. I was someone new. Someone harder. Someone who was going to fight back. Please like, comment, and subscribe, because what happens next will shock you. This grandmother was done being prey. Let me tell you about Marcus Alexander Bennett before he became the stranger who wanted me dead. He came into this world on June 23, 1965, during one of the worst thunderstorms Alabama had seen in a decade. The power went out halfway through my labor, and the nurses had to deliver him by flashlight while thunder shook the hospital windows. When he finally emerged, screaming with a fury that made the doctor laugh, I looked down at his tiny, perfect face and felt my heart expand in ways I didn't know were possible. This one's got fire in him, the doctor said, cutting the umbilical cord. He's going to do great things, Mrs. Bennett. Mark my words. I believed him. God, how I believed him. Richard cried when he held Marcus for the first time, big, silent tears rolling down his weathered cheeks. My husband wasn't an emotional man by nature, but something about cradling that tiny life in his carpenter's hands broke him open. I promise you, son, he whispered to the sleeping baby, I'll teach you to be a good man. An honest man. The kind of man who takes care of his family. For the first 10 years, Marcus was everything we'd dreamed. He was bright, reading by age 4, doing complex math in his head by 7. But more than that, he was kind. He rescued injured birds and nursed them back to health. He defended smaller kids at school, even when it meant getting into fights with bigger boys. He'd come home with bloody noses and split lips, and when I'd ask why he did it, he'd just shrug and say, someone had to, Mom. I gave up my teaching career to raise him properly. Back then, that's what mothers did, we sacrificed our dreams so our children could chase theirs. I'd loved teaching, loved opening young minds to literature and history. But I loved Marcus more. So I put away my college degree and became a full-time mother, devoting every waking hour to making sure my son grew up loved, supported, and strong. We weren't wealthy. Richard made a decent living as a carpenter, and we had the house, a modest 3-bedroom cottage Richard had built himself, board by board, nail by nail. But we were rich in the ways that mattered. Sunday dinners around the table. Family game nights where Marcus would always let me win at Scrabble. Summer evenings catching fireflies in the backyard while Richard grilled hamburgers and told terrible jokes. Those were the good years. The golden years. Before everything turned to ash. The nightmares started when Marcus was 8. He'd wake up screaming about monsters under his bed, demons in his closet, shadows that moved on their own. I'd rush to his room and find him huddled under the covers, trembling and soaked with sweat. "Mama, don't let them get me," he'd sob, clinging to me like I was the only solid thing in a world of terrors. "Promise you won't let them get me." "Never," I'd whisper, holding him tight. "Mama will always protect you. Always." I'd sit in the rocking chair by his bed for hours, sometimes until dawn, just to make sure he felt safe. Richard worried I was coddling him, making him weak. But I couldn't bear to see my baby afraid. Looking back now, I wonder if even then, some part of him was already broken. Some piece that should have been there just wasn't. When Marcus was 12, he broke his leg falling out of the old oak tree in our backyard, the same tree that still stands there today, its branches reaching toward my bedroom window like accusing fingers. He'd climbed higher than he should have, trying to impress some girl from school, and the branch snapped under his weight. I'll never forget the sound of his scream, or the way his leg bent at that impossible angle, or the whiteness of the bone pushing against his skin. Richard scooped him up and drove like a madman to the hospital while I sat in the back seat, cradling Marcus's head in my lap and praying harder than I'd ever prayed. They had to do surgery, insert pins to hold the bone together. Marcus was in the hospital for a week, and I never left his side. Not once. I slept in the chair next to his bed, holding his hand through the pain and the fever and the nightmares that came back worse than ever. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered one night, delirious with pain medication. "I'm sorry I'm such a burden." "Don't you ever say that," I told him fiercely, smoothing his sweat-dampened hair back from his forehead. "You're not a burden. You're my whole world. You're everything." He smiled then, a sleepy, trusting smile. "Love you, Mama. Love you too, baby. Forever and always." If I'd known that would be one of the last times he'd say those words with any real feeling, I would have held on to that moment harder. I would have memorized every detail, the exact timbre of his voice, the way his hand felt in mine, the innocent trust in his eyes. Richard died on April 3, 1997, when Marcus was just starting his sophomore year at Auburn University. Heart attack, massive and sudden. One moment he was on his knees in the garden, planting tomatoes and humming an old Johnny Cash song. The next moment he was on his back in the dirt, his eyes staring up at the sky he'd never see again. I found him when I came out with lemonade. Dropped the pitcher and ran to him, fell to my knees beside him and begged him not to leave me. But he was already gone, his hand already cold, his lips already blue. The paramedics said he'd died instantly. Said he didn't suffer. But I suffered. God, how I suffered. Marcus came home for the funeral, of course. He stood beside me at the graveside, his arm around my shoulders, and when they lowered Richard's casket into the ground, I felt Marcus's grip tighten. I thought it was grief. I thought we were sharing this horrible moment, this unbearable loss, together. But when I looked up at him, his eyes were dry. Not a single tear. And he wasn't looking at his father's grave. He was looking past it, his gaze distant, calculating something I couldn't see. After the funeral, after the guests left and the casseroles were put away and the sympathy cards stopped coming, Marcus sat me down at the kitchen table. He had a notepad and pen, very businesslike, and his voice was gentle but firm. "Mom, we need to talk about practical matters. The house, Dad's life insurance, your finances. I need to know where everything stands. Marcus, your father just died 3 days ago." "I know, Mom. I know. But that's exactly why we need to do this now, while everything is fresh. Where's the deed to the house? What about Dad's savings account? His pension? His tools, some of those are worth real money, you know." I stared at him, this stranger wearing my son's face. "You want to discuss selling your father's tools before he's cold in the ground?" He had the decency to look ashamed, but only for a moment. "I'm just trying to help, Mom. To make sure you're taken care of. These are things that need to be handled." "What needs to be handled," I said quietly, "is grief. We need time to grieve." But Marcus didn't want time. Over the next few weeks, I'd catch him going through Richard's things, not with sadness or nostalgia, but with an appraiser's eye. Calculating. Evaluating. Determining worth. When he went back to school, I was almost relieved. At least when he was gone, I could cry in peace. He met Victoria in his senior year at Auburn. Brought her home for Christmas 1999, and I remember my first impression of her so clearly it might as well have been yesterday. She was beautiful in a cold, perfect way, like a porcelain doll behind glass in an antique shop. Blonde hair pulled back so tight it made her face look sharp. Designer clothes that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. And eyes that took in every detail of our modest home with barely concealed disdain. "So this is where Marcus grew up," she said, her voice pleasant but somehow condescending. "How quaint. Quaint." Like our home was a rustic curiosity instead of the place where Richard had poured his heart and skill into every board, every window frame, every carefully crafted detail. "It's lovely to meet you, Victoria," I said, because I was raised to be polite even when my instincts screamed warnings. "Marcus has told me so much about you." "All good things, I hope," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. That night at dinner, I watched her watch Marcus. Watched her touch his arm just so, laugh at his jokes with perfectly timed enthusiasm, agree with everything he said. It looked like love. It looked like devotion. But there was something calculated about it. Something practiced. "She's perfect, isn't she, Mom?" Marcus said later, after Victoria had gone to bed in the guest room. "Smart, beautiful, comes from a good family. Her father's in real estate development, very successful. They're well connected. Not, I love her. Not, she makes me happy. Just a list of her attributes like she was a business acquisition." "Do you love her?" I asked. He looked at me like it was a strange question. "Of course I do. Why else would I be with her?" "Because she has money," I thought but didn't say. "Because she comes from the world you want to be part of. Because you see her as a stepping stone to something bigger." But I said none of that. Instead, I smiled and said, "Then I'm happy for you, sweetheart." It was the first of many lies I would tell myself about Marcus. They married in 2002, a lavish ceremony paid for entirely by Victoria's family. I sat in the front row wearing my best dress, the one I'd bought 15 years earlier for Richard's cousin's wedding, and watched my son promise to love, honor, and cherish this woman who looked at me like I was furniture she'd have to find room for. After the wedding, they moved into a condo in Birmingham. I stayed in the house, my house, Richard's house, alone for the first time in my life. The silence was deafening. Marcus called every few weeks, always brief, always distracted. "Just checking in, Mom. Everything good?" "Great. We're really busy with work. I'll try to visit soon." He never did. Victoria came with him for Thanksgiving that year. I'd spent 3 days cooking, turkey with sage stuffing just how Marcus liked it, sweet potato casserole, green bean almondine, homemade rolls, 3 kinds of pie. I'd cleaned the house until it gleamed, put fresh flowers in every room, set the table with my good china. Victoria took one look at the spread and said, "Oh my. This is certainly a lot. I hope you didn't go to too much trouble. We're really watching what we eat these days." She picked at her food like it might poison her, made pointed comments about the outdated kitchen, suggested that maybe next year we should just go to a nice restaurant instead of bothering with all this. After they left, I found a half-full bottle of my arthritis medication missing from the medicine cabinet. At first, I thought I'd just misplaced it, maybe taken it with me to the store and left it in my purse. But when it happened again the next month, Marcus and Victoria visited for a weekend, and afterward my blood pressure pills were in the wrong bottle, I started to wonder. Started to fear. But mothers don't want to believe their children are capable of evil. So I told myself I was being paranoid. That grief and loneliness were making me imagine things. That my son, my baby boy, would never hurt me. I told myself that right up until the night I heard them planning my murder. Please like, comment, and subscribe because what comes next is how I started gathering the evidence that would save my life, and destroy theirs. 3 years ago, on a bright Saturday morning in October, I signed the deed to my house over to Marcus. It seemed like the right thing to do at the time. I was 79 years old, my arthritis was getting worse, and I'd had a small stroke the previous winter, nothing major, just enough to remind me that I wasn't going to live forever. My lawyer, old Thomas Mitchell, who'd handled Richard's estate, advised against it. "Eleanor, you're putting yourself in a vulnerable position," he said, peering at me over his reading glasses. "You can set up a trust, make Marcus the beneficiary when you pass, but keep control while you're alive. This way you're protected." But I shook my head. Marcus is my son, Thomas. My only child. This house will be his someday anyway, why make him wait and pay all those estate taxes? This is my gift to him. He'll take care of me. I know he will. Thomas sighed, that deep sigh of a lawyer who knows his client is making a mistake but can't stop them. At least let me put in some clauses. Life estate, for instance, so he can't force you out. Right of residency until death or until you choose to leave. That won't be necessary, I said with more confidence than I felt. Marcus would never do that to me. How spectacularly wrong I was. When I handed Marcus the papers, officially transferring ownership of the house Richard built, the house where we'd raised him, the house that held every memory of our family, his eyes lit up like Christmas morning. He hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. "Mom, this is incredibly generous. I don't even know what to say. You're the most amazing mother anyone could ask for." Victoria was there too, standing slightly behind him, and when I looked at her over Marcus's shoulder, I saw something in her expression that made my blood run cold. Not gratitude. Not warmth. Just satisfaction. Like a chess player who just watched their opponent make the exact move they'd been waiting for. "We'll take such good care of you," Victoria said, her voice honey-sweet. "You'll never have to worry about anything again. This is your home, Eleanor. It always will be." The lies came so easily to her. The changes started gradually, so subtle I almost didn't notice at first. A week after signing over the deed, I came home from grocery shopping to find the locks had been changed. When I tried my key, it wouldn't turn. I stood there on my own porch, bags in hand, confused and embarrassed, until Marcus opened the door from inside. "Oh, Mom. I'm so sorry. I had the locks changed for security, there've been break-ins in the neighborhood, and I completely forgot to give you the new keys. How silly of me." He handed me a key ring with a sheepish smile, and I told myself it was an honest mistake. Just an oversight. Nothing sinister. But the incidents kept piling up, each one small enough to explain away but together forming a pattern I was too afraid to acknowledge. Victoria started making comments about how I kept house. Eleanor, the way you wash dishes isn't very sanitary. You really should use hotter water. Those towels you hung in the bathroom clash with the new decor we're planning. Your cooking is lovely, really, but so heavy. Maybe it's time we updated the menu to something more heart-healthy. My recipes, perfected over decades, were suddenly insufficient. My cleaning methods, which had kept this house spotless for 40 years, were inadequate. My presence itself seemed to be an inconvenience they tolerated with increasingly thin patience. Then Victoria suggested, very gently, very reasonably, that maybe I should move into the smaller bedroom on the first floor. For your safety, Eleanor. Those stairs are so steep, and with your arthritis. We just worry about you falling. The downstairs room is closer to the bathroom, closer to the kitchen. It makes so much more sense. The downstairs room was barely bigger than a closet. The master bedroom, mine and Richard's for 35 years, had windows facing the garden, built-in bookshelves Richard had crafted by hand, a reading nook where I'd spent countless peaceful hours. I'm comfortable where I am, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Victoria's smile never wavered, but something flickered in her eyes. Of course. Whatever makes you happy. For now. They moved themselves into the master bedroom 2 weeks later. I came home from my doctor's appointment to find all my things boxed up and placed in the first floor room. My clothes in garbage bags. Richard's last remaining items, his favorite reading chair, the quilt his mother had made, gone. Just gone. We donated them, Victoria said when I asked, her voice flat. You were hoarding, Eleanor. Living in the past. We thought it would be good for you to declutter. You know, move forward. She'd thrown away my husband's memory like it was trash. I should have fought harder. Should have screamed, called the police, called my lawyer. But I was so tired, and they made me feel like I was being unreasonable, oversensitive, difficult. They gaslit me so effectively that I started to believe maybe I was the problem. That's when the medication incidents began in earnest. I keep meticulous records of my prescriptions, always have. I have a small notebook where I track every pill, what it's for, the dosage, when I take it, when I need refills. Decades of teaching had made me organized, detail-oriented. It's a habit that probably saved my life. One morning, I opened my blood pressure medication and found the pills were different. Same bottle, same label, but the tablets inside were a different color, a different shape. I called the pharmacy, my hands shaking. Mrs. Bennet, according to our records, you already picked up this month's refill 2 weeks ago, the pharmacist said. But I didn't, I insisted. I haven't been to the pharmacy in over a month. There was a long pause. Someone picked it up in your name. The signature here says. Marcus Bennett. Is that a family member? My son. Well, he showed ID and said you'd asked him to pick it up for you. Is that not correct? I closed my eyes. I see. Thank you. I confronted Marcus about it that evening. Did you pick up my prescription? He looked up from his laptop, utterly unbothered. Yeah, Mom. You mentioned you were running low, and I was near the pharmacy anyway. Saved you a trip. You're welcome. But these pills are different. They're not the same as what Dr. Patterson prescribed. The pharmacy said they're the generic version. Same medication, just cheaper. I thought you'd appreciate saving money. Marcus, you can't just change my medications without telling me. Mom. His voice sharpened. I was trying to help. If you're going to be ungrateful about it, I won't bother next time. And there it was. The subtle threat wrapped in wounded feelings. If I complained, if I pushed back, I was the bad guy. I was the ungrateful mother. I started hiding my medications after that. Keeping them in my room, out of sight. But things kept disappearing and reappearing. Pills would be loose in the bottles when I'd always kept them in their sealed packets. Dosages would be wrong. Once, I found my anti-anxiety medication replaced with something that made me so dizzy I could barely stand. The worst part? Every time I brought it up, they made me feel crazy. You're getting confused, Mom. It happens at your age. Are you sure you didn't mix them up yourself? Maybe you should see a neurologist. Memory problems can be serious. They were grooming everyone around me, friends, neighbors, even my doctors, to believe I was becoming senile, incompetent, unreliable. Then there was the incident with the tea. I've always loved chamomile tea before bed. It's a ritual I've had since I was a young woman, a quiet moment to reflect on the day, to say my prayers, to prepare for rest. Victoria knew this, and one evening she brought me a cup, smiling warmly. I made you your favorite. With a touch of honey, just how you like it. It was the first kind gesture she'd made in months. Despite everything, hope flickered in my chest. Maybe things were getting better. Maybe I'd been wrong about her. I drank the tea. An hour later, I couldn't keep my eyes open. My limbs felt like they were filled with wet sand. My thoughts moved like molasses. I managed to stumble to my room and collapse on the bed, still fully dressed. When I woke, it was past noon the next day. 14 hours. I'd slept for 14 hours straight. Marcus was in the doorway when I finally emerged, looking concerned. Mom, are you okay? You slept so long we got worried. I don't know what happened. Maybe you should see Dr. Patterson again. This kind of thing, excessive sleeping, confusion, could be signs of something serious. Victoria appeared beside him, her face a mask of worry. We're just concerned, Eleanor. These episodes are becoming more frequent. Episodes. Like I was having some kind of breakdown instead of being systematically drugged. That's when I started to truly understand, they weren't just making my life difficult. They were building a narrative. Creating a history of incidents that would make my eventual death seem inevitable, natural, even expected. They were playing a long game, and I was the piece they planned to remove from the board. The night I overheard them planning my murder, I'd been back from the rehabilitation center for exactly 7 hours. 7 hours during which I'd pretended to be the confused, grateful old woman they expected. 7 hours during which they'd had no idea I'd discovered the truth about the letter from the law office, about the inheritance plans, about any of it. But I knew. And knowledge, I was about to discover, is power, even in the hands of an 82-year-old woman everyone thought was helpless. Please like, comment, and subscribe, because the grandmother they tried to bury is about to become their worst nightmare. That first night in the garden shed, wrapped in Richard's old work quilt that still faintly smelled of sawdust and Old Spice, I made a list. Not on paper, I couldn't risk them finding anything, but in my mind, cataloging every strange incident, every missing pill, every suspicious moment I'd dismissed or explained away. The pattern was clear once I stopped making excuses for them. This hadn't started recently. This had been building for years, ever since I signed over the house. Maybe even before that. How far back did their plot go? When had my son looked at me and seen not his mother but an obstacle between him and money? As dawn broke and birds began their morning songs, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't go to the police, not yet. What would I tell them? That I heard my son whispering about my death? They'd chalk it up to paranoia, maybe even suggest Marcus put me in a home, for my own safety. After all, everyone in town knew sweet Marcus Bennett and his lovely wife Victoria. Who would believe the confused old woman over them? No, I needed proof. Real, undeniable, court-worthy evidence. And I needed help. Patricia Crane had been my friend since 1972, when we'd both volunteered for the church's summer Bible school. She was 5 years younger than me, sharp as a tack, and had spent 30 years as a paralegal before retiring. More importantly, she was one of the few people who'd never bought Marcus and Victoria's perfect couple routine. "There's something off about that girl," Patricia had told me years ago, right after the wedding. "Can't put my finger on it, but watch yourself around her, Eleanor. She's got the eyes of a poker player, always calculating." I defended Victoria back then. Insisted Patricia was being judgmental. Now I realized my friend had seen the truth before I'd been willing to acknowledge it. I waited until mid-morning, when I knew Victoria would be at her law office and Marcus at his remote work setup upstairs. Then I slipped out the back door, using the spare key that still worked on the garden gate, and walked the 4 blocks to Patricia's house. I must have looked like death warmed over, uncombed hair, yesterday's clothes, eyes wild with sleeplessness and fear, because Patricia took one look at me and pulled me inside without a word. "Oh, honey," she said, wrapping me in a hug that finally broke through my shock. I collapsed against her, my whole body shaking with silent sobs. When I could finally speak, I told her everything. The letter from the law office. The years of medication tampering. The changed locks and stolen possessions. And finally, the conversation I'd overheard, my son and his wife plotting to poison me for my inheritance. Patricia listened without interruption, her expression growing harder and colder with each revelation. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, staring at her clasped hands. "That son of a bitch," she finally said, and I'd never heard such venom in her voice. "That calculating, evil son of a bitch. And that woman is pure poison. Patricia, I need help. I need to prove what they're planning, but I don't know how." "First things first," she said, suddenly all business. "You stay here today. Rest. Eat something, you look like you haven't had a proper meal in weeks. Let them wonder where you are. Let them sweat a little. But they'll worry. Good. They should worry. They should wonder if maybe you went to the police, or if you had another stroke and someone found you. A little panic might make them sloppy." She was right. And for the first time since I'd heard them plotting my death, I felt something other than fear. I felt anger. Clean, righteous, powerful anger. Patricia made me soup and toast, wouldn't let me leave until I'd eaten every bite. Then she outlined a plan. "You need to become invisible," she said. "Act confused, compliant, weak. Make them think you're exactly what they believe you are, a feeble old woman who can barely remember what day it is. Meanwhile, you document everything. Every conversation, every incident, every piece of evidence you can find. How do I record them without them knowing?" Patricia smiled, a fierce, vindictive smile that reminded me why I'd always liked her. "Leave that to me." She went to her desk and pulled out a small device, no bigger than a USB drive. "Digital voice recorder. My grandson gave it to me last Christmas, thought I might want to record family stories. Turns out it's perfect for catching criminals." She showed me how to use it, how to hide it in a pocket or sleeve, how to activate it with a simple button press. The recording quality was surprisingly good, she demonstrated, clear enough to pick up whispered conversations. "Keep it on you at all times," she instructed. "And be smart about when you record. You want conversations where they incriminate themselves, discussions about the plan, the poison, the timeline." That afternoon, Patricia drove me to a medical supply store 3 towns over, where no one would recognize us. We bought a pill testing kit, the kind used to identify unknown medications. Then to an electronics store for a cheap smartphone registered under Patricia's name. "You'll need this to take pictures," she explained. "Photos of any evidence you find, documents, medications, anything. Email them to me immediately so even if they find the phone, the evidence is already safe." I felt like a spy in some elaborate thriller. Except this wasn't fiction. This was my life, and the villains were my own family. Before I went home, Patricia made me practice. Practice acting confused and weak. Practice hiding the recorder. Practice taking photos quickly and quietly. Over and over until the movements became automatic. Remember, she said, gripping my shoulders and looking me dead in the eye. You are smarter than they think. Stronger than they believe. You survived pneumonia that should have killed you, you can survive this too. But you have to be careful, Eleanor. One wrong move and they might decide to speed up their timeline. I nodded, swallowing my fear. I'll be careful. And Eleanor? If anything feels wrong, if you sense any immediate danger, you call 911 first and me second. Don't be brave. Be alive. I returned home just before dinner, letting myself in through the kitchen door with my old key. Marcus was in the living room and jumped up when he heard me enter. Mom! Where have you been? We've been worried sick. I blinked at him, putting on my best confused elderly woman expression. Have I been gone long? I went for a walk and must have lost track of time. These spring days all feel the same. Victoria appeared from the dining room, and I could see the calculation in her eyes, trying to determine if I was genuinely confused or hiding something. You should have told us you were going out, she said, her voice dripping with false concern. We were about to call the police. What if you'd fallen? What if you'd gotten lost? I'm sorry, I said meekly, shuffling toward my room. I didn't mean to worry you. I just wanted some fresh air. Marcus exchanged a look with Victoria, a look that said *C. She's getting worse, *. Perfect. Over the next 3 days, I played my role to perfection. I pretended to forget conversations we just had. I left the stove on, accidentally, though I made sure to catch it before any real danger. I asked the same questions multiple times. I shuffled when I walked, fumbled with simple tasks, stared blankly at the TV. And all the while, I was watching. Listening. Recording. The recorder in my pocket caught Marcus on the phone with someone from the bank. Yes, I'm calling about my mother's account. Eleanor Bennett. I have power of attorney now. Well, she's becoming incompetent, and we need to make sure her assets are protected. Except he didn't have power of attorney. That was an outright lie. I photographed documents I found in Marcus's office, printouts from the law firm, estate settlement plans, even a draft obituary they'd already written for me. In it, they described me as a beloved mother and grandmother who'd struggled with dementia in her final years. Grandmother. I'd never been a grandmother. Marcus and Victoria never had children. It was all fiction, crafting a narrative that would explain away any suspicions when I finally died. The most damning evidence came on the 4th night. I'd pretended to go to bed early, but instead sat fully dressed in my darkened room, the recorder running in my pocket. Around 10 p.m., I heard them in the kitchen, speaking in low voices. The new blend is ready, Victoria said. I tested it on that stray cat last week, worked like a charm. Fell asleep within an hour, heart stopped by morning. No suffering, no signs of struggle. She'd practiced on an animal first. The cold calculation of it made my stomach turn. How long after she starts drinking it? Marcus asked. 3 nights. The first 2 cups build up in her system. The 3rd night will be the final dose, I'll double it. By morning, she'll be gone, and the me will rule at natural causes. Elderly woman, recent hospitalization, weak heart. Textbook. And you're sure there won't be traces? The sedative metabolizes quickly, especially in elderly patients with compromised systems. Even if someone orders a tox screen, which they won't, it'll be out of her system by the time they test. I've done the research, Marcus. I've planned for every contingency. You're brilliant, you know that? Marcus's voice held admiration. I should have married you sooner. Victoria laughed, a sound like breaking glass. We couldn't have done this if you'd married me sooner. We needed the timing to be right. Her signing over the house, the pneumonia scare, the established pattern of decline. It all had to align. So we start tomorrow night? Tomorrow night, Victoria confirmed. 3 days from now, Eleanor Bennett will be dead, and will be rich. They clinked glasses, toasting my upcoming murder like it was a business deal they'd just closed. I sat in the darkness, the recorder capturing every word, and felt something shift inside me. I'd been afraid before. Angry. Hurt. But now I felt something new, something crystalline and cold and absolutely focused. They wanted to kill the sweet, forgiving Eleanor who'd always put others first, who'd always turned the other cheek, who'd never fought back. Fine. That Eleanor was already dead. The woman they were dealing with now was someone else entirely, someone who'd been forged in the fires of betrayal and tempered by the will to survive. I emailed the recording to Patricia immediately, along with photos of every document I'd found. Then I sat down and made a new plan. Not just for survival, but for justice. They thought they were playing chess. They thought they'd already won. They had no idea I was about to flip the entire board. Please like, comment, and subscribe, because what happens next is the moment this grandmother stops running and starts hunting. The next morning, I went downstairs for breakfast with a smile on my face and poison in my pocket. Not real poison, I'm not a murderer, regardless of what they were. But I'd spent the previous night preparing my counter-move, and the small vial in my bathrobe pocket held my secret weapon. Victoria was already in the kitchen, humming as she prepared her special tea blend. I watched her measure out the chamomile, add what looked like honey but was probably sedative, stir it all together with the careful precision of someone mixing a deadly cocktail. Good morning, Eleanor, she said with that bright, false smile. Did you sleep well? Wonderfully, I lied. I'd been up until 3 a.m. planning, but she didn't need to know that. Though I'm looking forward to my evening tea. I've missed our routine. Victoria's eyes lit up, actually lit up, at my words. I'm so glad to hear that. I'll make sure to prepare it extra special for you tonight. I bet you will, I thought. I spent that day being the perfect victim. Confused about which day it was. Struggling to remember where I'd put my reading glasses, they were in my pocket the whole time. Asking Marcus the same question 3 times. Every action carefully calculated to reinforce their belief that I was exactly what they needed me to be, helpless and oblivious. Meanwhile, Patricia was in motion behind the scenes. She'd contacted Thomas Mitchell, my lawyer, and explained the situation in carefully vague terms. Thomas, who'd never liked Marcus, agreed to adjust my will without informing anyone. If I died under suspicious circumstances, a secret letter would be opened, detailing everything I knew. She'd also reached out to an old friend in the district attorney's office, asking hypothetical questions about elder abuse cases, evidence requirements, what would be needed to build a prosecutable case. She did it so carefully, so casually, that no one suspected these weren't just academic questions. And she'd prepared our emergency backup plan. If anything went wrong, if they decided to accelerate their timeline, she had a bug-out bag ready with cash, clothes, and a burner phone. We'd get me somewhere safe and blow the whistle on everything. But I didn't want to run. I wanted to finish this. That evening, Victoria served me my special tea with a smile that would have fooled anyone who wasn't looking for the lies beneath it. Here you go, Eleanor. I made it with extra honey, just how you like it. Thank you, dear. You're so thoughtful. I took the cup with trembling hands, not from fear, but from the effort of containing my rage, and raised it to my lips. Took a small sip, just enough to wet my lips. Then I set it down on the side table. Oh, it's hot. I'll let it cool a moment. Victoria's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Don't let it get too cold, or it'll lose its effectiveness. I mean, its flavor. Of course, dear. I waited until she left the room. Then, with movements I'd practiced a dozen times, I pulled the small vial from my pocket, tea from Patricia's house, safe and untainted, and did a quick switch, pouring Victoria's poison into a sealed container and replacing it with the good tea. The poison tea went into a plastic bag and then into my pocket. Evidence. I drank the safe tea slowly, making soft appreciative sounds. When Victoria checked on me 30 minutes later, the cup was empty, and I was yawning dramatically. Oh my, I am suddenly so tired. I think I'll head to bed early. Victoria's expression was pure satisfaction. Rest well, Eleanor. You've had such a long day. I made my way to my room, stumbled convincingly, though I steadied myself on the doorframe, and closed the door. Waited until I heard her footsteps retreat. Then I pulled out my phone and texted Patricia, night 1 complete. Sample secured. Her response came immediately, perfect. Be careful. See you tomorrow. I spent that night wide awake, listening to every sound in the house, the recorder running continuously just in case. Around midnight, I heard footsteps pause outside my door. The handle turned slightly, checking if it was locked. Finding it secured, I'd added a bolt they didn't know about. The footsteps retreated. They were checking to see if I was dying. The next morning, I emerged from my room earlier than usual, deliberately looking more energetic than expected. Victoria's face fell when she saw me making coffee in the kitchen. Eleanor. You're up early. I slept so well last night, I said cheerfully. Best sleep I've had in weeks. Must be that wonderful tea you made. I could see her mind racing, trying to figure out what went wrong. Not enough sedative? Had I not drunk it all? Was my elderly system more resilient than expected? Well, she said carefully, perhaps we should try a different blend tonight. Maybe something stronger. That would be lovely, dear. Oh, she'd make it stronger, all right. And I'd be ready. This went on for 3 nights. Each evening, Victoria prepared her poison tea with increasing doses. I could tell from how carefully she measured, how she double-checked her proportions. Each night, I switched it out, preserved the evidence, and pretended to drink myself into sedated sleep. Each morning, I woke up healthy and energetic, driving Victoria to distraction. On the 4th night, I heard them arguing in hushed, urgent tones. It's not working, Victoria hissed. I've tripled the dose. She should be dead by now. What the hell is wrong with her? Maybe her system built up a tolerance? She is taking a lot of medications. That's not how it works, Marcus. She should be dead. We're running out of time. People are going to start wondering why we were so sure she was declining when she clearly isn't. So what do we do? There was a long, terrible pause. Then Victoria said, we do it manually. Tonight. Smother her with a pillow, call 911 in hysterics, say we found her that way. At her age, no one will question it. My blood turned to ice. This was it. They'd abandoned the careful plan for something crude and immediate. Which meant I had to move now. I waited until they went to bed, then I slipped out of the house through my window, a maneuver I'd practiced several times over the past few days. At 82, I'm not as spry as I used to be, but fear and necessity are powerful motivators. Patricia was waiting for me at the end of the driveway in her car, engine running. It's time, I said. She nodded grimly. Then let's finish this. We drove straight to the police station. Officer Rodriguez was on duty, a good man who'd helped me several years back when kids vandalized my garden. He took one look at my face and immediately brought us to a private room. I laid it all out. Every recording. Every photo. Every vial of poison tea I'd collected, carefully labeled and dated. The forged documents. The fake power of attorney. The pattern of medication tampering. And finally, the recording from tonight, Victoria and Marcus planning to smother me in my sleep. Rodriguez's face grew darker with each piece of evidence. Mrs. Bennet, he said slowly, are you telling me your son has been trying to kill you for his inheritance? Not trying, officer. Planning. Systematically, carefully planning. Tonight was supposed to be the night they finally succeeded. He looked at Patricia, who nodded confirmation. I've been helping her document everything. It's all real. Every word, every recording, every shred of evidence. Rodriguez picked up the phone. I'm calling the DA. And we're sending officers to your house right now. They'll claim I'm senile, I said. That I imagined all of it. He looked at the evidence spread across the table, hours of recordings, dozens of photos, vials of poison tea. Mrs. Bennet, with all due respect, no one's going to believe you're senile after seeing this. You've just handed us one of the most thoroughly documented attempted murder cases I've ever seen. Within an hour, squad cars surrounded my house. I watched from Patricia's car, parked safely down the street, as officers knocked on the door. Watched Marcus answer in his bathrobe, confused and annoyed. Watched his expression change from irritation to fear as they asked him to step outside. Victoria tried to run. Actually tried to run out the back door with a hastily packed bag. They caught her in the garden, right next to the shed where I'd spent that first terrible night planning my survival. The irony wasn't lost on me. They arrested them both right there. Miranda rights read under the porch light. Handcuffs clicking shut like the closing of a book. As they loaded Marcus into the police car, he looked around wildly and spotted me sitting in Patricia's car. Our eyes met across the distance. I didn't look away. Didn't flinch. Just stared at this stranger wearing my son's face until he was the one who turned away, slumping into the back seat in defeat. It's over, Patricia whispered, squeezing my hand. But it wasn't. Not quite. Because what they found when they searched the house would reveal secrets even darker than I'd imagined. Please like, comment, and subscribe, because the basement was hiding evidence of a conspiracy that went far beyond just Marcus and Victoria, and when the truth came out, it would shake our entire community. They found the basement workshop at 2:37 a.m. I wasn't there, I was at Patricia's house, drinking weak tea and trying to process everything that had happened. But Officer Rodriguez called to tell me what they discovered, and his voice shook in a way that made my chest tighten with dread. Mrs. Bennet, we need you to come to the station tomorrow morning. There's a lot more to this than we thought. When I arrived the next morning, Detective Sarah Morrison was waiting for me, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who specialized in elder abuse cases. She sat me down in a conference room where evidence was spread across a table like pieces of a horrifying puzzle. Mrs. Bennet, I want to prepare you for what you're about to hear, she began. Your son and daughter-in-law weren't just planning to kill you. They were part of something much larger. She opened a folder and pulled out photographs of the basement. My basement. The one I'd barely gone into over the past 3 years because Victoria claimed the stairs were too dangerous for me, that the damp would aggravate my arthritis. The space was set up like a laboratory. Shelves lined with vials and bottles, all carefully labeled. A computer with spreadsheets tracking dosages, timelines, symptoms. And worst of all, a filing cabinet full of documents relating to other elderly people in our community. We're still piecing it together, Detective Morrison said, but it appears your daughter-in-law was running an elder exploitation ring. She'd identify vulnerable seniors, usually widows or widowers without close family, gain their trust, and then either steal from them directly or help facilitate their deaths so their estates could be looted. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. How many? We've identified 7 potential victims so far. 3 deaths in the past 4 years that were ruled natural causes but now look suspicious. 4 others who are currently alive but show similar patterns: unexplained cognitive decline, mysterious financial transfers, sudden changes to their wills. My hand started shaking. And Marcus? Detective Morrison's expression softened with something like pity. He was fully involved. The evidence suggests he was the one who identified Marks, using his job in financial services to flag elderly clients with substantial assets and no close family. Then Victoria would make contact, usually through some community connection, gain their trust, and kill them, I finished. My son wasn't just trying to murder me. He was a serial killer. They both were. We believe your case was different because you're his mother, Morrison continued. They couldn't just make you disappear. It had to look completely natural, beyond any suspicion. That's why they took their time, built the narrative of your decline, made sure everyone in the community believed you were failing. They showed me more evidence. Spreadsheets where my name was listed alongside others, all of us reduced to numbers, our lives measured only by our net worth. Recordings of Victoria talking to Marcus about other projects, coldly discussing the best methods for different scenarios. Mrs. Bennett, in that filing cabinet, we found detailed plans for staging accidents. Fall down the stairs. Medication overdoses. Carbon monoxide poisoning made to look like a faulty furnace. They'd thought of everything. I looked at the young detective who'd been taking notes in the corner. She couldn't have been more than 30, but her eyes held a deep sadness. How does someone become this? I asked. How does a child I raised, a man I loved, become capable of this? Nobody had an answer for that. Maybe there isn't one. They found something else in the basement, a hidden compartment behind a false wall. Inside was cash. Lots of cash. Nearly $400,000, carefully organized in bundles. Money stolen from victims over the years, skimmed from accounts, siphoned from estates. Blood money. And there were passports, multiple passports in different names for both Marcus and Victoria. They'd been preparing for years to vanish once they'd accumulated enough wealth. I was supposed to be their final score before they disappeared to Mexico or Costa Rica or wherever people like them go to live off their ill-gotten gains. There's one more thing, Detective Morrison said, hesitating. We found evidence that this didn't start with you. Your husband, Richard. My heart stopped. What about Richard? She slid a folder across the table. Inside were medical records, Richard's medical records from the weeks before his death. And handwritten notes in Victoria's writing, dated from before she'd even officially met Marcus. I'm sorry, Mrs. Bennett. But we believe Victoria targeted your family specifically because of your assets. She researched you, found out about your husband's heart condition, and there's evidence suggesting Marcus's chance meeting with Victoria at college wasn't chance at all. The room spun. Everything I'd thought I knew was a lie. Are you saying Victoria killed Richard? That she targeted him, and Marcus was part of it? We're saying that Richard's death might not have been the accident everyone thought. We've requested an exhumation order. If there are traces of certain cardiac accelerants, we'll know. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. My husband's death, the loss that had shattered my world, it might have been murder. And my son might have been complicit. Patricia, who'd been sitting silently beside me, finally spoke up. What happens now? Now, Detective Morrison said, we build the case. Mrs. Bennett's evidence is enough to charge them with attempted murder and conspiracy. But with what we found in the basement, we're looking at multiple counts of murder, theft, fraud, and elder abuse. They're never seeing the outside of a prison cell again. They showed me one final piece of evidence, Victoria's journal, discovered in a locked drawer of her desk. The entries were chilling in their casual cruelty. March 15th, subject showing increased confusion. Medication swap working as planned. Marcus worries I'm moving too fast, but I've done this before. Patience is key. April 3rd, she signed over the house. Marcus's sentimental approach worked perfectly. Now we can really begin. Timeline, 6 to 8 months until completion. Mexico by winter. June 12th, she's becoming suspicious about the pills. Need to gaslight harder. Marcus suggested having her doctor run cognitive tests. Brilliant. If medical professionals think she's declining, no one will believe her if she tries to speak up. September 29th, the pneumonia was a gift. If she'd died in the hospital, it would have been perfect, no questions, clean inheritance. But the old bitch survived. Doesn't matter. We'll finish it at home. More personal this way. She'd called me, the old bitch. Written about murdering me like it was a simple task on her to-do list. I closed the journal, my hands surprisingly steady. I want to testify, I said. At trial. I want to look them in the eyes and tell the world exactly what they did. Detective Morrison nodded. We were hoping you'd say that. Your testimony will be crucial. But Mrs. Bennett, I need to warn you, the trial will be brutal. The defense will try to discredit you, claim you're confused or vengeful. They'll make you relive every moment of abuse. Let them try, I said quietly. I've survived pneumonia, poisoning, and my own son trying to murder me. I can survive a courtroom. They arrested 3 more people over the next week, associates of Victoria's who'd helped facilitate the elder abuse ring. A crooked lawyer who'd helped forge documents. A nurse at a care facility who'd provided access to patients. And most shockingly, Victoria's father, Lawrence Miller, who wasn't dead at all but living under an assumed name in Florida, having faked his death to escape fraud charges. The whole thing was a family business. Victoria had learned the art of elder exploitation from her father, perfected it, and brought Marcus into the fold. When they found Lawrence Miller, he was already working on his next victim, an 89-year-old widow with no children and a beachfront property worth millions. The case made national news. The murder house, they called it. Reporters camped outside, neighbors gave interviews expressing shock and disbelief. Former friends of Marcus and Victoria appeared on TV, saying they'd never suspected that they'd seemed like such a nice couple. Only Patricia had seen the truth. Only she'd warned me years ago, and I'd been too blind to listen. Don't beat yourself up, she told me one evening as we sat on her porch, watching the news vans finally leave. They were professionals. You loved your son. Parents aren't supposed to suspect their children of murder. But maybe if I'd listened to you. You'd have what? Accused him without proof. Pushed him away and died alone and confused? No, Eleanor. You survived because when the time came, you fought back. That's what matters. The trial took months to prepare. Both Marcus and Victoria tried to flip on each other, each claiming the other was the mastermind, that they'd been coerced or manipulated. But the evidence was too clear, too documented. They'd worked together as partners in this grotesque enterprise. I spent that time healing, both physically and emotionally. I moved in with Patricia temporarily. I couldn't bear to return to the house, to the space where I'd been systematically terrorized. The house where Richard might have been murdered. The house that had become a factory for death. Eventually, the state seized it as evidence, and I was fine with that. Let it be torn down, I thought. Let all those secrets be buried in rubble. I also reconnected with people I'd lost touch with over the years. Neighbors Marcus and Victoria had subtly isolated me from, old friends from church I'd stopped seeing because it was too much trouble to arrange visits. I realized how thoroughly they'd cut me off, making me dependent only on them, eliminating anyone who might notice the abuse. But I was free now. and I was done being quiet. Please like, comment, and subscribe, because the trial is about to begin, and what happens in that courtroom will determine whether justice is served or if they find a way to escape punishment for their crimes. The trial began on a cold January morning, exactly 1 year after the night I overheard them plotting my death. The courtroom was packed, standing room only, with overflow crowds watching on monitors in adjacent rooms. The media had dubbed it the Bennett inheritance murders, and it had captivated the nation. An elderly mother against her murderous son. David versus Goliath, if David was 82 and Goliath was a sociopath with a law degree. Marcus and Victoria sat at separate defense tables, their lawyers having successfully argued for severed trials. Victoria's would come first. They dressed her in a conservative gray suit, pulled her hair back in a simple style, removed all jewelry. Trying to make her look innocent, sympathetic, nothing like the calculating killer she actually was. She wouldn't look at me. Not once during jury selection, not during opening statements. She kept her eyes down or focused on her lawyer, as if by not acknowledging my presence she could somehow will me out of existence. The prosecution went first. Assistant District Attorney James Chen was a formidable presence, mid-40s, with the kind of quiet intensity that made you believe every word he said. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, he began, this is a case about betrayal. About a woman who married into a family not for love, but for money. A woman who saw vulnerable elders not as human beings but as targets. As resources to be exploited and eliminated. He laid out the evidence methodically. The basement laboratory. The files on multiple victims. The spreadsheets tracking dosages. The journal with its cold, clinical descriptions of murder. The vials of poison tea I'd collected. The recordings of Victoria and Marcus discussing my imminent death. Each piece of evidence landed like a physical blow. I watched the jurors' faces shift from curiosity to horror to disgust. Then it was my turn to testify. I'd been warned it would be difficult. That Victoria's lawyer, a shark named Douglas Brennan, would try to rattle me, confuse me, make me appear unreliable. But when I walked to that witness stand, past Victoria's table, something interesting happened. She flinched. Just slightly, but I saw it. After months of pretending I didn't exist, of treating me like I was already dead, she flinched when faced with the living, breathing reality of the woman she'd tried to kill. And I realized, she was afraid of me. I took my seat, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God. ADA Chen approached with a kind smile. Mrs. Bennett, can you tell the jury how you first met the defendant, Victoria Miller? I took a breath and began my story. Not the sanitized version, not the polite version. The truth. I told them about the Christmas she first came to our home, how she'd looked at everything with calculating eyes. I told them about the gradual erosion of my autonomy after I signed over the house, the changed locks, the stolen possessions, the relegation to the smallest room like I was an unwanted tenant. I told them about the medications that went missing or were mysteriously replaced. About the tea that made me sleep for 14 hours straight. About the night I overheard them planning to poison me, speaking about my death as casually as people discuss dinner plans. My voice never wavered. I'd practiced this testimony for months, and more importantly, I'd lived it. Every word was seared into my memory. Mrs. Bennett, Chen said gently, can you tell the jury what you did when you realized your son and daughter-in-law were planning to kill you? I decided to fight back, I said simply. I gathered evidence. I documented everything. I refused to die quietly just because it would be convenient for them. The courtroom was absolutely silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Chen played the recordings. All of them. Victoria's voice, cold and clinical, discussing dosages and timelines. Marcus asking about the insurance payout. Both of them toasting my upcoming death. Several jurors had tears in their eyes. One older woman in the back row was openly crying. Then Chen displayed the journal entries on a large screen, Victoria's handwriting enlarged for everyone to see. "The old bitch survived," he read aloud. "Doesn't matter. We'll finish it at home." He turned to me. "Mrs. Bennet, how did it feel to read those words? To know this was how your daughter-in-law thought of you?" I looked directly at Victoria for the first time. She still wouldn't meet my eyes. "It hurt," I said quietly. Not because I cared what she thought of me, by that point, I knew what she was. It hurt because my son had chosen this woman. Had become someone who could plan his own mother's murder without apparent remorse. That's the part that breaks your heart. Not the betrayal of someone you never really trusted, but the loss of someone you loved more than your own life. Now Victoria looked up. Our eyes met, and in that moment, I saw past the cold calculation to something underneath. Fear, yes. But also something else. Anger. Resentment. As if I'd somehow wronged her by refusing to die on schedule. "Thank you, Mrs. Bennet," Chen said. "Your witness, Mr. Brennan." Victoria's lawyer stood, straightening his expensive suit. He smiled at me, a patronizing smile that immediately put my guard up. "Mrs. Bennet, you're 82 years old, correct?" "Correct. And you've been diagnosed with arthritis, high blood pressure, and you recently survived a serious bout of pneumonia. Is that right?" "Yes." "Would you say your memory is as sharp as it was, say, 10 years ago?" I knew where he was going. The old strategy, paint me as confused, unreliable, a senile old woman who'd misunderstood innocent conversations. "My memory is excellent," I said firmly. "I can tell you what I had for breakfast this morning, and I can tell you what your client said when she plotted my murder. Both with equal clarity." A few people in the gallery chuckled. Brennan's smile tightened. "Mrs. Bennet, isn't it true that you were taking multiple medications during this time? Medications that can cause confusion, paranoia, even hallucinations?" "I was taking medications that were being tampered with by your client," I replied. "That's rather different." "But you can't prove my client tampered with anything, can you? You have no actual evidence of her touching your medication." "I have evidence of my medications being changed without my knowledge or consent. I have recordings of her discussing sedating me. I have testimony from my pharmacist about unauthorized pickups. What I don't have is video of her actively switching pills, but then, murderers rarely commit their crimes on camera." "Objection," Brennan said sharply. "The witness is being argumentative." "Overruled," Judge Martinez said. "Answer the questions directly, Mrs. Bennet, but you may defend yourself against implications." Brennan tried another angle. "Mrs. Bennet, you've admitted to having a difficult relationship with your daughter-in-law. Isn't it possible that you misinterpreted innocent conversations because you already didn't like her?" "I didn't like her because she was systematically trying to kill me," I said. "That tends to strain a relationship." More chuckles from the gallery. Brennan was getting frustrated. "Let's talk about these recordings," he said. "You made them secretly, without anyone's knowledge or consent. Isn't that illegal wiretapping? In Alabama, one-party consent is legal for recordings. I was that party. I consented to recording conversations I was part of or that took place in my own home." I saw Chen hide a smile. We'd prepared for this exact line of questioning. Brennan tried for 2 more hours to shake me, to trip me up, to make me appear confused or vindictive. He suggested I'd fabricated evidence out of spite. He implied I was mentally unstable. He even had the audacity to suggest that perhaps I'd been the one planning to harm them, and they were the real victims. But I'd survived pneumonia, poisoning, and a year of systematic abuse. A lawyer trying to intimidate me was nothing. When I finally stepped down from the witness stand, I felt lighter than I had in years. The trial continued for 3 more weeks. They brought in the other victims, an 87-year-old man who'd lost his life savings to Victoria's schemes, a widow whose husband's death was now being investigated as murder, adult children who'd watched their parents decline mysteriously before dying suddenly. The forensic accountant testified about the money trail, $400,000 in cash, plus another $2 million moved through various accounts over the years. All stolen from elderly victims. The medical examiner testified about the poisons found in the basement laboratory, sedatives, cardiac accelerants, even antifreeze in carefully measured doses designed to mimic natural illness. And most damning of all, they brought in Lawrence Miller, Victoria's father, who'd agreed to testify against his daughter in exchange for a reduced sentence. He sat in the witness box looking like what he was, a career criminal in his 70s, weathered and hollow-eyed. "Did you teach your daughter to target elderly victims?" Chen asked. "Yes," Lawrence said flatly. "Been doing it since she was 16. She had a gift for it, could charm anyone, make them trust her. We worked together for years before she met Marcus." "And did you help plan Eleanor Bennett's murder?" "I advised on it. Told Victoria the T method was too slow, that she should just stage an accident. But she wanted it clean, wanted to be able to stay in the community after. Said the Bennetts had deep pockets, that this was going to be their retirement score." Victoria's face was white as paper. Her own father was burying her. The defense tried to mount a case based on coercion, claiming Marcus had manipulated Victoria, that she was a victim of domestic abuse who'd been forced into the scheme. But the evidence was too overwhelming. The journal was in her handwriting. The laboratory was her design. The victims she'd targeted before even meeting Marcus proved she'd been doing this long before he was in the picture. The jury deliberated for 7 hours. When they returned, the 4 women stood and read the verdict. "On the count of attempted murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of conspiracy to commit murder, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of elder abuse resulting in serious bodily harm, we find the defendant guilty. 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 18 counts in total." Victoria showed no emotion, but her hands gripped the table so hard her knuckles went white. Judge Martinez sentenced her to life without possibility of parole, plus an additional 150 years for the other crimes. "Ms. Miller," she said, "you preyed on the most vulnerable members of our society. You turned trust into a weapon and used it to steal, abuse, and murder. This court has no mercy for someone who showed no mercy to others." Victoria was led away in handcuffs. As she passed my seat, she finally looked at me directly. "You should have died," she hissed. "You were supposed to die." "But I didn't," I said calmly. "And now you'll spend the rest of your life thinking about that." Marcus's trial came 3 months later. It followed the same pattern: overwhelming evidence, desperate defense tactics, my testimony from the stand. But this one was harder. Because he was still my son. When I took the stand and looked at him, I didn't see the monster who'd plotted my death. I saw the little boy who'd clung to me during thunderstorms. The teenager who'd brought me flowers on Mother's Day. The young man I'd been so proud of. And I saw the moment when he'd chosen money over love, ambition over family, murder over mercy. "Marcus," I said during my testimony, speaking directly to him even though I was supposed to address the jury, "I loved you. I would have given you anything you asked for. You didn't have to kill me to get the house or the money. You just had to wait. You just had to love me back." His composure finally cracked. Tears streamed down his face, though whether they were from remorse or self-pity, I couldn't say. "I'm sorry," he mouthed. "But sorry doesn't bring back the years of fear. Sorry doesn't erase the betrayal. Sorry doesn't resurrect the other victims or give their families closure." Marcus was convicted on all counts. Life without parole, just like Victoria. As they led him away, he called out to me. "Mom. Please. I love you." I turned away. Because that person wasn't my son anymore. My son died the day he decided I was worth more dead than alive. This was just a stranger wearing his face. The other conspirators were sentenced to varying terms. Lawrence Miller got 20 years, the corrupt lawyer got 15, the nurse got 10. The whole network was dismantled. But the biggest victory came 3 months after the trial ended. They exhumed Richard's body. The toxicology report came back positive for a rare cardiac accelerant, the same one found in Victoria's basement laboratory. My husband hadn't died of natural causes. He'd been murdered, just like Victoria had planned to murder me. But she'd already been convicted and sentenced. This just meant she'd carry the weight of one more death into her prison cell. They reburied Richard with full honors. I stood at his grave, Patricia beside me, and finally said a proper goodbye. "I'm so sorry," I whispered to the headstone. "I didn't know. I should have protected you." But Patricia squeezed my hand. "Eleanor, you were a victim too. You trusted your son. You had no reason to suspect. This isn't your fault." Maybe she was right. Maybe I'd been a victim. But I was also a survivor. And now, I was free. Please like, comment, and subscribe, because this story isn't over yet. There's one more chapter, the one where I discover the attic's secrets that prove this conspiracy went even deeper than anyone imagined, and the final revelation that changes everything I thought I knew about my family's history. 6 months after the trials ended, I finally returned to the house. The state had released it back to me after all the evidence had been processed. It sat empty and haunted, yellow crime scene tape still fluttering from the porch railings. The garden had gone wild, weeds choking out my roses, the oak tree's branches scraping against the windows like skeletal fingers. I stood in the driveway, my hand in Patricia's, and tried to decide if I could ever live here again. "You don't have to go in," Patricia said gently. "We can hire someone to pack everything, sell it sight unseen." But I shook my head. No. I need to face it. This was Richard's house. Our house. I can't let them take that from me too. We went in together. The house smelled stale, dusty. Everything was exactly as it had been the night of Marcus and Victoria's arrest, teacups still on the counter, their hasty dinner preparations abandoned mid-task. It felt like walking through a tomb. I wandered through the rooms, touching familiar objects. Richard's favorite chair. The piano I used to play. Family photos that Marcus had never bothered to take down, evidence of a love that once existed before it curdled into greed. And then I remembered. The attic. Richard's attic. The one place in the house I'd never been allowed to go, had never thought to question. Just old tools and man stuff, he'd always said with that gentle smile. Nothing interesting, honey. For 40 years of marriage, I'd respected his privacy. But Richard was dead now, murdered by the very people he'd welcomed into our family. Whatever secrets he'd kept, I needed to know them. The attic key was still where it had always been, in Richard's old desk, hanging on a brass ring with a faded green string. My hands shook as I pulled it out. "Eleanor, are you sure about this?" Patricia asked. "Maybe some things are better left." "No more secrets," I said firmly. "I've had enough secrets to last 3 lifetimes." The attic stairs creaked under my weight as I climbed them for the first time. The air grew colder the higher I went, and when I unlocked the door and pushed it open, the hinges screamed in protest. What I found inside took my breath away. This wasn't a storage space. This was a shrine. An archive. A confession. File cabinets lined every wall, each drawer meticulously labeled. Boxes stacked in corners. And in the center, a large trunk with Richard's initials carved into the lid, RTB, Richard Thomas Bennett. I opened the trunk with trembling hands. Inside were letters. Dozens of them, all written in Richard's careful handwriting, all addressed to me. The top one was dated April 1997, 2 weeks before his death. My dearest Eleanor, it began, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've finally found the truth I've been too ashamed to share with you in life. I sank onto an old wooden crate, Patricia sitting beside me, and I read. Richard wrote about his past, a past I'd never fully known. How he'd gotten involved with some dangerous men in the 1970s, back when he was younger and desperate for work. How they'd used his construction business as a front for money laundering. How he'd signed permits and documents without fully understanding what he was approving. By the time I realized what I'd gotten us into, it was too late, he wrote. These weren't the kind of men you walked away from. They owned me, Eleanor. They owned us. Every year, they'd come collect their tribute, and I paid it in silence, skimming from our savings, taking on extra jobs, anything to keep them from touching you or Marcus. My eyes blurred with tears. All those years I'd wondered why we never had quite enough money, why Richard worked such long hours, why he seemed so tired all the time. He'd been paying off criminals to keep us safe. But it got worse. In 1996, a man named Lawrence Miller came to me, Richard's letter continued. He'd heard about my situation and made me an offer I couldn't refuse. He'd make my debt disappear, make the dangerous men disappear, if I helped him with something. He had a daughter, Victoria. Smart girl, he said. Going places. If I could arrange for her to meet Marcus, if I could encourage the relationship, Lawrence would take care of everything. My hand flew to my mouth. Oh God. Oh God, no. I'm so ashamed, Eleanor, Richard wrote. I manipulated our son. I pushed him toward a woman I knew was dangerous because I was too cowardly to face the consequences of my own mistakes. Lawrence kept his word, the debt collectors disappeared, the threats stopped. But I've carried this guilt every day since. The next paragraph made me sob aloud. I'm dying, Eleanor. Not from natural causes, though that's what it'll look like. Lawrence Miller double-crossed me. That heart medication the doctor prescribed last month? I saw Lawrence talking to the pharmacist. I know what's coming. I'm going to die, and it's going to look natural, and you're going to raise Marcus alone with that viper Victoria circling closer every day. Richard had known. He'd known Victoria and her father were going to kill him, and he'd felt too guilty about his past mistakes to stop it. Please forgive me, the letter ended. I thought I was protecting you by keeping secrets. Instead, I've left you vulnerable to the very people I was trying to shield you from. If there's any way to send a warning from beyond the grave, I'll try. Watch Victoria. Watch Marcus. Don't trust them. And please, my love, don't blame yourself for any of this. You've been the only good thing in my life, the only clean, pure thing in a life I've otherwise corrupted. The letter was signed with shaking handwriting, as if he'd been crying when he wrote it. Below his signature was a postscript. The files in this attic contain everything, all the records, all the names, all the proof of what Lawrence Miller and his associates have done. If you ever need to fight back, if you ever need evidence, it's all here. I'm sorry I was too weak to use it myself. Be stronger than I was, Eleanor. Be brave. I sat in that dusty attic and cried for the husband I'd lost twice, once to death, and now again to the revelation that he'd carried such terrible burdens alone. Patricia opened the file cabinets while I composed myself. Inside were decades of records, photos, recordings, financial documents, criminal records. Richard had documented everything, building a case he'd never had the courage to use. But more importantly, there were files on other people. People Victoria and Lawrence had targeted before me. Some I recognized, community members who died, naturally, over the years. Others I didn't know, but their stories were all the same. Elderly. Wealthy. Isolated. Exploited. Dead. Eleanor, Patricia breathed, pulling out a ledger. This goes back 30 years. Lawrence Miller has been doing this for 30 years, and Richard tracked it all. We called Detective Morrison. She arrived with a forensic team, and they spent 3 days cataloging everything in that attic. What they found reopened cold cases across 3 states. It turned out Lawrence Miller wasn't just Victoria's father, he was the patriarch of an entire criminal enterprise spanning decades. The trial had caught his daughter and son-in-law, but this evidence exposed the roots of the operation. 8 more people were arrested based on Richard's files. Lawyers, accountants, a funeral director, a real estate agent, all complicit in the systematic exploitation and murder of elderly victims. The death toll climbed to 47 confirmed victims, with another 20 suspected cases still under investigation. My quiet life in Alabama had been sitting on top of a decades-long murder conspiracy, and my husband had known about it all along. The revelation broke something in me. Not because Richard had kept secrets, I understood why he had, understood the impossible position he'd been in. But because of the tragic waste of it all. If he'd trusted me, if he'd told me the truth, maybe together we could have stopped Lawrence Miller 30 years ago. Maybe Victoria never would have targeted our family. Maybe Marcus would have grown up differently, away from her influence. Maybe. 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 The word echoed through my thoughts like a ghost. I sold the house eventually. Couldn't bear to live with all those ghosts, all those secrets seeping through the walls. Used the money to establish a foundation, the Richard Bennett Center for Elder Justice. We provide free legal assistance to seniors facing abuse, exploitation, or fraud. We educate communities about the warning signs. We fight for stronger laws and better protections. Richard's legacy wouldn't be his mistakes. It would be the lives we saved using the evidence he'd gathered. I moved into a small cottage by the lake, Patricia's guest house, actually. She wouldn't hear of me living anywhere else. We're family now, she said simply, and she was right. Sometimes, late at night, I sit on the porch and think about Marcus. Wonder if there was a moment when he could have chosen differently. A fork in the road where he might have turned toward the light instead of toward the darkness Victoria offered. I've had therapists tell me it's not productive to think this way. That Marcus made his choices as an adult, that I can't blame myself. But he's still my son. Some part of him always will be, no matter how much I wish I could excise that love from my heart. I never visited him in prison. Couldn't bring myself to face him across a visitor's table, to hear whatever justifications or apologies he might offer. Some betrayals are simply too deep to bridge. But I did write him one letter, about a year after his conviction. Just one. Marcus, it read, I want you to know that I forgive you. Not because you deserve forgiveness, and not because it changes anything. I forgive you because carrying that anger was poisoning me, and I refuse to let you take one more thing from my life. You've already taken enough. I hope someday you understand what you've lost. Not the money or the house or the freedom, but the love of the woman who would have died for you naturally. You threw away something precious and irreplaceable, and you did it for things that never mattered at all. I loved you from the moment you were born until the moment you decided I was worth more dead than alive. That love died with your choice, and no amount of time or tears will resurrect it. You'll spend the rest of your life in prison. I'll spend the rest of mine free, free from fear, free from abuse, and free from the burden of being your mother. Goodbye, Marcus. I hope you find some measure of peace, though you certainly don't deserve it. I never sent it. Burned it instead, watching the paper curl and blacken in the fireplace until nothing remained but ash. Some letters don't need to be received. They just need to be written. It's been 3 years now since that terrible night when I heard them plotting my murder. I'm 85 years old. My arthritis is worse, my hearing isn't what it used to be, and some mornings it takes me a good 10 minutes just to get out of bed. But I'm alive. And more than that, I'm living. The foundation is thriving. We've helped over 300 seniors escape abusive situations, recovered millions in stolen assets, and successfully prosecuted 47 elder abuse cases. Richard would be proud, I think. His evidence led to justice for so many families beyond just our own. I've become something of an accidental activist. I give talks at senior centers, community groups, anywhere that will have me. The grandmother who fought back, they call me in the media. It's sensational and a bit embarrassing, but if it means even one person recognizes the warning signs of elder abuse and speaks up, then I'll accept the attention. Patricia and I have become inseparable. We're the odd couple of the senior community, me with my tea and Bible study, her with her wine and political activism. But we balance each other out. She makes me braver than I'd be alone. I like to think I make her a little softer around the edges. I've also reconnected with people from my past, old teaching colleagues, former students who are now in their 50s and 60s, neighbors I'd lost touch with during those dark years when Marcus and Victoria were isolating me. They all say the same thing, Eleanor, you seem so different. Lighter somehow. And they're right. I am lighter. The burden of fear is gone. The weight of abuse has been lifted. For the first time in years, I'm just Eleanor, not a victim, not a target, not a mother being exploited by her own child. Just me. I still have nightmares sometimes. Dreams where I'm back in that house, hearing their voices plot my death. Dreams where I drink the poison tea and there's no Patricia to save me, no recorder to capture the evidence. I wake up gasping, my heart racing, and it takes Patricia's gentle voice to remind me, you're safe, Eleanor. You're here. You won. But did I win? Sometimes I'm not sure. Yes, justice was served. Yes, they're in prison. Yes, I survived. But I lost my son. I lost the possibility of grandchildren. I lost the dream of growing old with family surrounding me, lost the fantasy of a Marcus who'd visit on Sundays and bring me flowers and tell me stories about his life. That Marcus never existed, except in my imagination. The real Marcus was always capable of what he did, the seeds were there, waiting for the right circumstances and the right accomplice to bring them to full bloom. That's the hardest truth to accept. Not that he changed, but that maybe he was always this person and I simply couldn't see it. Last month, I received a letter from Victoria. It was forwarded through the district attorney's office. Prisoners can't contact victims directly. She'd written asking for forgiveness, claiming she'd found God in prison, that she was a changed woman. I read it once, then fed it through Patricia's shredder. Some people don't deserve forgiveness. Some crimes are simply too monstrous to absolve with prayers and pretty words. Victoria can find whatever peace she can in her prison cell. I owe her nothing, certainly not the comfort of my forgiveness. Marcus never wrote. I don't know if that makes him worse or better than Victoria. At least he has enough shame to remain silent. I visit Richard's grave every Sunday after church. Bring fresh flowers, sit on the bench nearby, tell him about my week. I've forgiven him for the secrets he kept. How can I not? He was trying to protect us, even if his methods were flawed. Even if his silence ultimately enabled the very thing he feared. We did the best we could, didn't we? I tell his headstone. We raised our son with love. We gave him every advantage. It wasn't our fault that he chose darkness over light. We can't control the choices our children make, we can only love them and hope they choose well. The lake where I live now is beautiful, peaceful in a way that house never was, not even in the good years. I spend my mornings on the porch with coffee and my Bible, watching the sun rise over the water. I've taken up painting, something I always wanted to try but never had time for when I was busy being a wife and mother. I'm not very good at it yet, but that's not the point. The point is I'm trying new things, exploring parts of myself I never got to develop when my life was devoted to others. Sometimes young mothers at church ask me for advice, and I always tell them the same thing: love your children fiercely, but don't lose yourself in the process. Be a full person with your own interests, your own friends, your own identity. Because someday those children will grow up and leave, and you need to know who you are when they're gone. And then I add, more softly, and teach them that family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about love and respect. If they can't treat you with both, then they don't deserve the title of son or daughter, no matter what biology says. The other survivors from Victoria's crimes have become my extended family. We meet once a month, a support group that's morphed into something more like a family reunion. We share stories, offer comfort, celebrate the small victories of healing. Margaret, who's 91, says I saved her life by exposing the conspiracy. She'd been one of Victoria's next targets, already in the early stages of exploitation when everything came crashing down. You're a hero, Eleanor, she always says. But I don't feel like a hero. Heroes are brave from the start. I was just terrified and trying to survive. I've written this all down, the whole story, from beginning to end. Maybe someone will read it someday and recognize the warning signs in their own life. Maybe it'll give someone else the courage to fight back, to refuse to be a victim, to demand justice even when the odds seem impossible. Or maybe no one will read it, and it'll just be a record for myself, a reminder of what I survived, what I overcame, how I refused to die quietly when that would have been so much easier. 3 years ago, I was a woman waiting to die, too afraid to admit that my own family was trying to kill me. Today, I'm a woman who's learned that survival isn't about being fearless, it's about being afraid and doing what needs to be done anyway. I'm 85 years old. I've buried a husband, lost a son to his own evil choices, stared death in the face and told it, not today. I've gathered evidence that brought down a multi-generational criminal enterprise. I've testified in court and watched justice served. And I'm still here. Still breathing. Still fighting for every senior who can't fight for themselves. They wanted me gone, erased, forgotten, reduced to ashes and a bank account to be divided up. But I'm still here, and I'm louder than I've ever been. This is my story. The story of Eleanor Rose Bennett, who refused to die on anyone's schedule but her own. If you're reading this and you recognize yourself in my story, if you're being isolated, controlled, exploited, or abused by family members, please know, you're not alone. You're not crazy. You're not imagining things. And you don't have to accept it. Fight back. Document everything. Find allies. Trust your instincts. And refuse to be erased. Because the world needs you alive. Your story matters. Your life has value beyond any inheritance or property or bank account. You matter. And if an 82-year-old woman with arthritis and a cane can bring down a criminal conspiracy and send her would-be murderers to prison for life, then you can escape whatever situation you're trapped in. Be brave. Be smart. Be loud. And above all, survive. That's my message to anyone who needs to hear it. Survive. The rest will follow. As for me, I'm going to finish my coffee, work on my painting of the lake at sunset, and then Patricia and I are going to the community center to play bridge with our friends. Tomorrow, I have a speaking engagement at the state capitol about elder rights legislation. Next week, I'm teaching a self-defense class for seniors at the local YMCA. Turns out there's a lot of power in an 85-year-old woman with a cane when she knows how to use it properly. I have plans. I have purpose. I have a life worth living. They tried to bury me. They didn't know I was a seed. And now I'm blooming in ways I never imagined possible, not in spite of what they did to me, but because of it. They meant to destroy me, but instead they forged me into something stronger, harder, more resilient. I'm Eleanor Bennett, survivor of attempted murder, destroyer of criminal conspiracies, advocate for elder justice, and living proof that it's never too late to fight back. And I'm not done yet. Not by a long shot. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched your heart, if it made you think differently about the elderly people in your life, if it gave you courage to face your own challenges, then please, like, comment, and subscribe. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Because somewhere out there, another Eleanor is sitting in fear, wondering if she's imagining the danger she's in, afraid to speak up, certain no one will believe her. Let this story be proof that we believe you. We see you. And we're ready to help you fight. You're stronger than you think. Braver than you know. And you deserve to live without fear. Now go out there and show the world what survivors are made of. This is Eleanor Bennett, signing off. But my story? My story is just beginning. If you or someone you know is experiencing elder abuse, please contact National Center on Elder Abuse Hotline, 1-800-677-1116. Adult Protective Services, available in every state. Local police, always call 911 in case of immediate danger. You are not alone. Help is available. You deserve to be safe.